Hi everyone. So I want to start doing videos on philosophy, philosophies, in general philosophy, because basically that's been a huge part of like the first 18 years of my life, and so that is kind of a point which I can share and talk about, and that a lot of people in mainstream general life can relate to, and that is a cool point to bring up, to discuss, and that assisted me in life. That assisted me to walk the destiny process because of all the questionings, the investigations, the considerations, and the facing your emotions, facing your biases, your doubts, your anything that's involved within philosophy. And so that's what I want to do for some videos here, because it seems like a lot of people will enjoy that. And here in this video, I wanted to start with an introduction of just all the different philosophies that I've already looked at. So it's kind of like a syllabus in the classroom where I'm just gonna go over different topics that you can expect for me to cover, and you're welcome to ask questions and to say which one of these you want to hear first or sooner. It would be cool if we can make this like a real discussion, or like a classroom, or even like a group thingy where there's discussion involved. But here, I'll just do what my part here, which is just to speak and talk from my points, from what I already looked at. Now, for me, I actually took philosophy classes in college. However, I was already interested in philosophy before that. I had entered my college, which is a 4-year liberal arts college, um, where you can get your bachelor's degree. I had entered there with philosophy as my major. Hold on. So I had entered there with philosophy as my major. And so, I took philosophy classes. I ended up graduating within psychology. I switched during like my 3rd year, and I took an extra semester to finish. And I really have a both basis with psychology and philosophy, and they are actually all the disciplines from anthropology to history to everything, all the sciences. They all cover aspects of life, of our world. Of course, the ones that I've been most interested in, even I'm still interested in everything, but the ones I've been most interested in is everything with a human being. Those areas of study that cover that are primarily philosophy and psychology, and other areas which also cover it are different dimensions of it. It would be anthropology and sociology. History also, of course, it depends how you in the camp of history. But those are the major ones that come to mind right now. So maybe this is how we'll start. Maybe I'm going to cover a little bit of the different, studies about the human being. Because for me, it's not about philosophy, this video. It's about the human being. That's always been my interest. Philosophy was just the word I used at the time to describe that. But even then, philosophy has its limits in terms of philosophy as what's defined within the academic world as study. Even within a personal definitions, it can be limiting. The question is always, it's not about branches of psychology or areas of psychology. It's about areas of life, areas of our lives. Our bodies, our minds, our brains, our perceptions, our everything. That's what we're studying. That's what we have questions on, and that's what we're looking answers for. And so the different areas, philosophy, psychology, anthropology, sociology. In general, sociology covers more societal areas. You have political science, even. Political science covers a lot of human behavior in terms of voting, so that's also relevant as well. You have linguistics. Linguistics study how language is basically spoken and created. It's also relevant as well. You have anthropology, which covers cultures around the world. That's also relevant a dimension as well. When I took psychology, there's a lot about, in psychology, relation to, honestly, there's so many different areas in psychology. There's psychology of language, psycholinguistics. There's cognitive psychology, which is how we, through our minds, perceive things, sort of like how we think about things. There's the sensation perception psychology, which is more the physical hardwiring of how we perceive through our bodies the world, like, on a physical level, like the brain, the cells, all the different connections involved. You have the neuropsychology, which covers primarily the brain, and how we use that and perceive that, how that relates to who we are, how we perceive things, act, do things. We have the behavioral psychology, which I suppose most relates to political science, because political science, they looked at voting behavior. With behavioral psychology, it's about your behavior and actually some very basic, fundamental, I guess in a way, laws, because they're so consistent of how human beings behave, and you can create situations, and this is probably one of the most strongest areas of psychology in terms of actually having influence over people or actually influencing a situation, moment, because it's basically how you condition a person to act or behave a certain way, and that has influenced much of the school education system. And this is like one of the, if you're old enough, like maybe if you're already in your 50s, you know about the psychology probably because this is all the craze. This was the most famous psychology at the time, like in the 90s, 80s, 70s, around there. That was like the big thing, or maybe even earlier than that too. But that was a huge thing, and that definitely changed a lot about how things happen within the workplace environment and school environment. So yeah, there's a lot of branches of psychology, and that relates a lot to about who we are, about real like physical things you can create within people. There's also social psychology, which there's lots of areas to that as well. It has a lot to do with relationships between people, like between friends or families, or when you like someone, you don't like someone, attractiveness as well. But that also one very interesting dimension which a professor of mine studied specifically, which was racism or stereotyping, where basically you have stereotypes according to how people look, and that they studied also very interesting, which is interconnected with cognitive psychology because of how we perceive things, but that's also another area as well. All these psychologies, they're not really limited to just their camp. They're very much, they're all about the human being, right? So the human being has various levels. You have your physical level with your brain, your system, your cells, and that has a level of conditioning as well. Where even the behavioral psychology, they predict, even on the cellular level, like your brain cells follow the behavioral principles of conditioning. So at a very level that exists where you can condition your cells. That's known, that's studied. Of course, the extent of it, we have limits in terms of the tools of psychology, well, how much can they really look at, but they can show that. And with cells, individual cells, they will respond to conditioning. It's really quite amazing. And of course, if one cell can show that, then how many of your cells can do that? Probably most of them or all of them in some way or another. And that maybe is even fundamental to how we learn or how cells change through time. Okay, that's just one level. And then you have other levels, which your perception of things, which you're aware of, and that's another level. even within psycholinguistics, has a lot to do with your ability to produce sounds, but even your ability to perceive sounds, And that connects, of course, to the brain with neuropsychology, because you have areas of your brain dedicated to speech. And so really, if you want to study one area of the human being, you're going to have to look at all the areas of the human being, really. You want the full picture. Like, you want to study language, you need to also look at the part of the brain that works with language, for example. So there's so many different dimensions that are all interconnected, correlated, that's great for cross-referencing. To just show that, this thing here exists, we're looking at, and it's on a physical level. You can show it. So, now with philosophy, what does philosophy have to do with all this? Philosophy then relates to, okay, us as human beings, what will we do? What do we think about? What are the camps within philosophy? Then you can look at the questions. Like, what are the main questions we have? With philosophy, you look at also the level of, I guess you can call it a higher level, where it's your awareness, your reasoning, your skills. And there's lots of different philosophies as well. There's philosophy of science, where you look at how do we actually come to a conclusion based on observations about things, and how does that really work, And that has a lot to do with having corroboration of evidence, where you can gather evidence to support something. But that doesn't mean that you can ever really disprove something from existing. You can only gather evidence for it to exist. You can't really disprove something not existing. You can only say so far that I haven't gathered evidence to prove it or show that it's here yet. Which is another really interesting dimension, where that's actually, you see a lot of scientists, they actually, I don't know if it's a lot or not, but at least very much in mainstream, like general society, people's perception of science, or how people use science, many people don't maybe understand that basic point where you really can't disprove anything. You can only have evidence for something, or you don't have any evidence. And that's really the basic law, because there could always be some time in the future, or sometime, or some place else on the earth where you can find something that exists that actually shows that theory to be real. And that's really interesting as well, which relates then to the philosophy of knowledge, which is epistemology. That has to also do with how we know things. And that's this whole questioning involved. You also have the philosophy of language, which also studies about how we reference words. What's interesting too is that, for me, the one reason, among other reasons, why I switched to psychology from philosophy is because philosophy, for some reason, the philosophy academics here in the United States, they don't like to use real-world evidence. So that's why it's non-scientific, which I found very odd, because I, of course, reference everything in my life to my actual life. It's not about I think about something in my head and pretend that's real. Always look at what I've already lived and experienced and observed, and use that as evidence for what I'm looking at, or what I'm trying to understand. So for me, that's why I switched to psychology from philosophy. But at the same time, there's plenty of points of questions about, ethics, about who we are, which then, of course, for me, I still reference to reality. And so you can consider what I'm doing here a philosophy if you want, but for me, that's definitely the better way to approach life. Then you try to ignore what you've lived, what you observed. And there's even like a small group of people within, I think Stanford was at the time, I don't know if they're still there or not, but they're doing the philosophy of psychology, or psychology of philosophy, or something like that, where they're trying to connect the two. And they're trying to do psychology studies testing philosophy theories out. So, those were also very young people too, people who are just, wanted the same thing, I guess, too. So for me, I take everything. When I discuss a topic, I reference everything I've already looked at, studied, and observed. Now, whenever you're dealing with any moment of philosophy, of discussion, of interaction, I always look at the deeper levels of what the human is going through, the dimensions. Are they having emotional reactions because that's right on the physical level? Are they having thoughts, and are those thoughts conditioned thoughts? Are they actually, really, how in charge are they of their life, of who they are? How much are they really in charge of their body? And that's like a philosophy or psychology that doesn't really exist, which is a point of self, of self movement, of self charge, of self decision. Because we assume free will is taken for granted, but many psychology studies show that human beings don't really have that much free will, because they're simply reactions, and the results of the studies show that human beings are reacting to situations created by the psychologists to see how they would react, or whether they would react according to how they predicted. And sometimes they did react according to how they predicted, or they did the opposite. So it's already in a way assumed that human beings are reactive. But how much willpower do human beings really have? And can we even really study willpower? So for me, I've always had lots of questions. And for me, to keep things interesting, I always look for the answers and actually go deeper and deeper as far as I can go. And I always use myself as the reference, as the table to test it against. So for me in my life, personally, I'm entering into childcare. And there I could even discuss the philosophies of childcare, the philosophies of parenting. And here you can even replace the word philosophy with beliefs, where it's beliefs of childcare, beliefs of parenting, meaning it's just like religion. Like, what do you believe is the best way? And what are different approaches? You can even say the approaches to childcare, the approaches to parenting. And that is even studied within psychology as well. And that's studied within developmental psychology. It's called, where developmental psychology is all about how human beings develop from birth till they grow up until the rest of their life. It's about that development of human being. And one thing they look at, some people, is parenting styles, how that affects children growing up. And of course, they have to categorize it, describe it. For me, in terms of how I approach things and look at things, you could have a certain parenting style, but I already know the human being well enough where it's impossible really to have a person say, okay, you're gonna do this parenting style, because that person is already a person. They have a history, they have a past, they have emotions, beliefs, ideas, and all that's going to come through within their voice, within how they act, how they speak, how they interact with children, with their children, if they're being a parent. And so that's what's really going to define the parenting style. We may call, let's say, a parenting style is more relaxed or liberal or more authoritative, but really what I'm seeing there is just the person themselves being themselves. Like, they didn't go through like some books and like pick that parenting style and train to be that parenting style. They may have looked through some books, but when they looked through some books, they read lots of different parenting styles, and the one they liked, they chose, and they kept doing. But that was very natural to them. That's what I'm claiming. Where you already are attracted to what you already are, in a way. So you're just acting out what you already are. And so if a parent is authoritative, because that's already what they had within them, unless they somehow practice for a few years, because if you look at how human beings develop their personalities, it takes many years. And that's something I don't remember reading anywhere being studied within developmental psychology yet, which is how personalities develop over time. There is areas of psychology which has personality tests. Even those I don't really agree with or like, if they're really quite primitive still, really quite, primitive, I think is the right word. But, assuming that the personality, tests are real and valid, what about actually looking about how children develop their personalities over time? That's not something that, as far as I can know has been studied yet. Maybe someone's studying right now, or maybe they already just studied it. I don't know. But that's a really interesting question as well. Like, look at a human being, the child. How do they develop who they are, their personality, how they act, how they think, their beliefs, their ideas, even their religion? And I mean, a lot of this is common sense. We can already have lots of hypotheses. I can have lots of ideas about it, and that's ready from my personal experience, where it all comes from your environment, your parents, your people around you. Where, for example, if your parent is being very aggressive towards you, authoritative, perhaps you'll submit to it and become very passive and become a very fearful child. But then you grow up and they start rebelling, and then you become authoritative yourself and cause your children go through the same fear cycle that your parents did to you, and so on and so forth. I mean, that kind of pattern seems quite obvious to me in terms of what I've seen growing up in life in general. So, some people always say that, oh, I'm never gonna turn to my mom and dad, but then they say that they turn just like their mom or dad, So there's a lot that's going on, and a lot of it seems to be unconscious, not really us being aware of it, which is a whole other dimension as well. There's a whole other field of psychology which I think is worth mentioning, which relates to marketing. And this I want to call the hidden psychology or secret psychology, because this isn't going to be openly discussed or shown or exposed, where there are people hired by companies, corporations, marketing agencies who are going to do psychology tests for them, who are going to do results for them, privately for them. It's not for the benefit of human beings to understand, like it's supposed to be through the academic world, We all share information. It's going to be private information for private individuals so they can take advantage of that. Whether they're selling their products so they can make more money, basically. But, that's not like really that much a secret, because look at how much advertisement is already out there. But then again, we're not really discussing it, so that's why it's kind of a secret. And so there's a lot involved, within all these studies. And we can go on and on about this. Right now we're at 22 minutes. And for me, it felt like maybe 8 minutes. There's a lot of information here. So, okay. So we're going to end it here for now. Let me know in the description if you want me to talk about a specific topic, or you have a question about anything. Literally about anything about life, about human beings, how you perceive. Maybe I'll have some perspectives on them based on what I studied, or send you some more information for you to read about. Why not? I already studied it, so I can already talk about it. And when I study something, I make it part of my life, So, ask away. It's really easy for me to answer. Thank you very much. Bye.